It's about time we talked about Eide. There is, in truth, no character in Night in the Woods more worthy of speculation and theory crafting than this mysterious cultist. Who is Eide? What's his connection to the Black Goat? What's his role in the cult? Why does he dress differently than the other members? And why does he hang out in places like Possum Jump, the graveyard, and the Historical Society? The answers are as elusive as the man himself, but after quite a bit of digging, I've stumbled upon a hypothesis that builds on so much of what we've already uncovered here on this channel. But before I continue, if you are a Night in the Woods fan, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me with a YouTube channel membership or over on Patreon. My dream is to make these videos full-time someday, and by doing any of those things, you'll be helping make that dream a reality. Let's start by reviewing everything we know about Eide. Our first encounter with him takes place at Harfest, when May sees him kidnap a teenager and bring them back to the mine to be sacrificed to the Black Goat. Notably, she sees Eide walk through the fence, which is why her first inclination is to call him a ghost. The next time we see Eide depends on the decisions of the player. If they choose to go to the graveyard with B, then he pops up at the end, after May is done desecrating, exhuming, the grave of Joe Shade. If they go to Possum Jump, then he'll harass May and Angus after they're done looking up at the constellations. And if they go to the Historical Society, then he'll chase May and Greg out of the building once they're done checking out the map room. Now, as anyone who's played the game to this point will know, going to two of these locations funnels the player into the climax, kicking off their first encounter with the cult. It's easy to miss, but Eide isn't among the cultists in this scene. We know this because he has a different outfit than the other members. The rest of them just wear black hoods, while he adds a miner's helmet to his getup. We don't see him in the group while they're executing Lerv, and he's certainly not one of the cult members who chases May into the woods, a job he would have been perfect for had he been there. Put a pin in all that. We'll get back to it later. In any case, the next time we see Eide is when May ventures into the woods on her own. Eide stands at the top of the hill not far from the mine, as if he's waiting for her. I get the vibe that he's serving as a sentry during this scene, a speedy guard to warn the cult in the event someone approaches the mine while they're down there. As I've said elsewhere, it's likely that the cult knew May would be showing up that evening, so in this case, he's specifically there to watch for her. Before he can say anything to May or answer any of her questions, Greg comes in from the top rope with his crossbow, shooting the elusive cultist in the shoulder. Eide flees down to the mine, where he is the only person to question the unnamed cult leader's generous treatment of May and her cohorts. He says it's not fair that they get to leave unharmed while he has permanent damage as a result of the crossbow bolt. The unnamed cult leader shuts him down, but this doesn't stop Eide from trying to get his revenge. As May and company exit the elevator, Eide cements his status as the game's true antagonist, appearing from behind them. He attempts to attack May, at which point the character you've spent the most time with, either Greg or B, will come to the rescue. In the ensuing confrontation, Eide's helmet is ripped off, revealing that they are actually a rather disheveled-looking cat. The elevator comes crashing down on him, slicing off his arm and causing the entire mine shaft to cave in, thus trapping May and her friends, the entire cult, and the now armless Eide in the depths of the mine. This is the last we see of Eide in Night in the Woods, but it's far from the end of our questions about him. Now that we've recapped Eide's appearances in-game, let's see what conclusions we can draw from all of this information. First off, he definitely has some kind of supernatural powers. He walks through a solid fence at Harfest, and appears out of nowhere to attack May during the climax. In other words, he can walk through walls and vanish at will. In Night in the Woods, such abilities are a sign of the Glimmer, a connection to the Black Goat, the cult's god. And who else, according to the game's lore, could walk through walls and had the Glimmer? Ed Scudder, the cult's founder, who first discovered the pit where the Black Goat resides. This, of course, has led many to speculate that Eide is really just Ed Scudder by a different name, and that his true identity has been in plain sight all along. This theory is possible. The cult has been around since the early 90s, 30 years before the events of the game, so there is a chance that old Ed is still kicking around somewhere. But I find this to be highly unlikely. If Ed Scudder were still alive, I don't think the unnamed cult leader would just give away his identity like this during their conversation with May. As the unnamed leader says before May leaves, she doesn't know who any of them really are beneath the hood, and in order for this to be true, Ed Scudder has to be a relative non-factor by this point in time. And because he literally discovered the black goat, the only way for him to be a non-factor is for him to be dead. Otherwise, his name would be one of the more concrete bits of information they'd be able to take away from this encounter, jeopardizing the cult's precious anonymity. But if Eide isn't Ed Scudder, then how does he have his powers? Well, I think the most likely explanation is that Eide is a descendant of Ed, probably his grandson. As I covered in my video about May's grandfather, the glimmer appears to be a hereditary trait that skips a generation, explaining why May and her grandfather can astral project, and why Germ and his grandmother have some degree of foresight. If the glimmer worked this way for the Borowski and Wharton families, then it's logical to assume that it works this way for the Scudder family as well. The more you consider this possibility, the more Eide's behavior throughout the game starts to make sense. As I said earlier, he's the only member of the cult to question the unnamed leader's generous treatment of May and her cohorts. He whines about the fact that they're getting off scot-free, in a manner that you could very well describe as petulant or entitled, which is exactly how you'd expect the grandson of the cult's founding member to act. He expects his opinions to be placed above those of others because of his lineage, because of the gift of the glimmer that his grandfather passed down to him. So when the cult's unnamed leader shuts down Eide, to Eide, it's not just a disagreement, it's a rejection of his presumed authority, of the authority he believes is owed to him thanks to his relation to Ed Scudder. It also explains why he's so cavalier in his other appearances throughout the game. If the cult really wanted to stay hidden, then they really should have had a word with Eide, because that dude is sloppy. Not only does he kidnap the Harfest kid while May is right around the corner, but he goes so far as to essentially taunt her from beyond the fence. I mean, this is basically his version of when the Night King says, "Come at me, bro," to Jon Snow at Hardhome. And to make matters worse, he then stalks May and her friends as they investigate suspicious locations throughout Possum Springs. So if staying hidden is the goal, then Eide is screwing up big time. Though the dialogue indicates that it was Eide's turn to take someone the night of Harfest, we have no evidence that anyone in the cult approved of him stalking May and the gang in their trips to Possum Jump, the Historical Society, and the graveyard. In fact, given that the cult is surprised to see May while they're executing Lerv, I think it's likely to assume that they didn't know about what Eide was up to at all. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, he's not even with them that night. All of this leads me to believe that Eide spends much of the game going rogue and acting of his own accord, just like he does in his final moments. And that sort of behavior just reinforces my belief that he's a descendant of Ed Scudder, a descendant who feels entitled to authority and as if he can do no wrong thanks to his lineage. But Eide isn't just a rebel in his behavior. He stands out from the other members from a visual perspective as well. As I mentioned earlier, he wears a miner's helmet over his cult robe. On one hand, this was likely the developer's way of ensuring he would stand out from the other cultists. But I think there's more to it than that. For the people of Possum Springs, a miner's helmet is an important cultural symbol. It's a reminder of their history as an old mining town, of the kinds of blue-collar jobs that used to serve as the town's lifeblood. By wearing a miner's helmet, Eide is aligning himself with that lineage, much in the same way as he seeks to align himself with Ed Scudder, his ancestor. Now, if you've watched my other videos, or simply paid close attention to the pro-union themes of Night in the Woods, you're probably wondering why someone who supports the cult, an explicitly conservative institution, would wear such an item. Most miners from that time period were proud union members, some going as far as to join the Tooth Society in order to fight back against their conservative bosses. So why would Eide choose to wear a miner's helmet, knowing that the workers he's aligned himself with would have hated him and the other cultists? Well, unfortunately, the pro-union past of a lot of blue-collar jobs has been largely forgotten by our cultural consciousness. It's rarely taught in schools. Companies get away with union busting all the time. And even the unions that are still effective have lost some of their teeth. pun intended. And in this vacuum of pro-worker sentiment, many other factions, including conservative institutions like the cult, have appropriated formerly pro-union symbols like the miner's helmet. This corruption is actually a major theme throughout the game. It's the same reason that the city council, a largely conservative government body, fawns over the mural of the dudes while ignoring the horrible conditions the miners used to work under, and the fact that several of them were killed for standing up for their rights in the Possum Jump Massacre. So when Eide puts on a miner's helmet and goes culting, he's not thinking about the actual history behind it. He's only thinking of the modern conservative bootstrap mentality that's been foisted upon it. So what's significant about all this? Why go on some rant about a miner's helmet when I've already put forth enough evidence to confidently say that we know Eide's true identity? Well, it's because although we know his true identity, we still haven't landed on why he's so important to this story. And in order to do that, we need to not only understand the symbolism behind the helmet, but take a peek underneath it. During the climax, May kicks off Eide's helmet, revealing that he's a cat. In the pre-Weird Autumn world, this led many to speculate that Eide was really Aunt Molly all along, but the updated epilogue has put that theory to rest. Still, the revelation that Eide is a cat is important. Otherwise, the developers wouldn't have made sure to show us this at such a critical moment. They do this, in my view, to establish as firmly as they possibly can that Eide is a foil for May. Eide is a cat and a descendant of Ed Scudder, a founding member of the cult, who had the glimmer, and passed down that gift, his connection to the black goat, to him. As for May, she's also a cat, and she too has an important ancestor, Arthur Borowski, a founding member of the Tooth Society, who likely had the glimmer, and passed down that gift, his connection to the black goat, to May's grandfather, who in turn passed it down to her. Eide and May are mirror images in opposition to one another, just as the cult and the Tooth Society are opposites. And it's the reveal that Eide is a cat that makes this abundantly clear. In another life, under different circumstances, May could have ended up like Eide, a puppet of the cult, used to further their agenda and obsessed with upholding the conservative order that led to the decline of workers' rights and atrocities like the Possum Jump Massacre. But instead, she followed the path of her grandfather and Arthur, becoming a wild and outspoken rebel. Eide shows us how May could have turned out if things had been different, if she had grown up in a household without an appreciation for unions, or if she'd used her misfortunes as an excuse to blame the minority groups targeted by the cult, homeless people, immigrants, and so-called non-contributors. There are other theories about Eide. Some folks have speculated that he's a brainwashed Casey, Scams, or even Bruce. Those are entertaining as ideas, but I don't think any of them come close to the power and the proof behind the theory I've detailed here. That Eide is May's opposite, her foil in the narrative, and her adversary not only at the end of the game, but in the battle between unions and conservative murder cults that have been terrorizing Possum Springs in one form or another for generations. And that's what makes Eide so important to not only Night in the Woods, but to our understanding of the cult of the Black Goat itself. Now, if we can get to the bottom of Eide's identity, then surely we can do the same thing with the eldritch entity behind all of this as well. So be sure to join me for my next theory video as we unravel the mystery behind the identity of the Black Goat. Thanks for watching. Huge shout out to my Night in the Woods collaborators Wolf.Godwin and Jordi Jaen Moreno for the music for my videos and my channel art. Big thanks to my silver tier subscribers, including James Pruitt, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 a month. Next week, I'll be posting my next Witcher video, followed by my long-awaited look at Lori M. But before I roll out, I'd like to send a very special shout out to my friends over at the Deepman Files podcast. The Deepman Files podcast is an audio drama series that follows a group of ghost hunters on their paranormal adventures. I've helped out with some of the episodes here and there, and will be writing and narrating an episode for them very soon. You can check them out by following the link down in the description box. See you guys next time.